Welcome and thank you all for coming this evening. I'm Nick Seabrook. I'm professor and chair of the Department of Political Science and Public Administration. I'm also the director of the Office of Public Policy Events, which is co-sponsoring tonight's event along with the College of Arts and Sciences. Our program tonight is on the topic of powering the future, the geopolitics of clean energy. And my guest tonight has spent the past 16 years working on the cutting edge of that field, clean energy technology and public policy. A native of Goshen, Indiana. Am I pronouncing that right? I didn't
Yeah.
say, I said Elkhart earlier and you corrected me, so I'm gonna make
Nope,
sure I get
that's
it right this
exactly
time.
right.
Goshen, Indiana, and self-described failed violinist. He graduated from Northwestern University School of Music in 2003. He then served in various roles in the Obama administration, including Special Assistant to the President for Intergovernmental Affairs, Associate Director of the Council on Environmental Quality, and Senior Advisor for Climate and Energy Policy. He then served from 2016 to 2024 as the Vice President of Global Public Policy and Business Development at Tesla, where he oversaw regulatory, legislative, and business development efforts for the company. Please welcome to UNF, Rohan Patel. So clean energy is a big topic. It's a topic that weaves together domestic policy, foreign policy, national security policy, trade policy, and environmental policy. So before we get into the details of those debates, I'm curious, Rohan, about your own origin story as an advocate for clean energy. How does a music major at Northwestern go on to be a White House advisor and Tesla executive?
Oh man. Oh well, that's a good question. First of all, I'm looking up myself. My mom, if Nick sent, so the reason why I'm here is because Nick Curry, who's a cello professor, just a dear friend and an amazing cellist. I don't know where oh, he's right here. That's the reason why I'm down here. And I got to see his concert yesterday and today. You guys may not know this, but UNF has a world-class music program in addition to all the other things you're doing. And so um, I knew Nick is a killer on the cello, but he's been able to build out this whole program with the Lawson Ensemble, with the Jacksonville Cello Workshop, and your dean. I got a chance to interact with your dean yesterday. She seems amazing. Your president, super supportive of things that are happening here at the university. And I was telling Nick, it's like you're never met a university president who's just smiling all the time. He's got a good way about him. It's awesome. How the hell did I go from being a music major and a music performance major and going to medical school and then land up at Tesla and in the White House? And so honestly, it's a very simple story, but it makes no sense even as I say it. I will say it out loud. You're going to say it doesn't make any sense because it doesn't. The guy that was running the Iowa campaign, a guy named Paul Toots, he was running the Iowa campaign early on for Obama, 2006, before he'd even announced. We're in a small office above this brewery in Des Moines, Iowa, and we're trying to divvy up who's going to do what. And there are people that were far more experienced than I was. I was, the pipsqueak, barely done anything, and asked all of us that were there, who's from the smallest town? Turned out Goshen, Indiana was the smallest amongst the 7 of us. So at that point, I was assigned environmental, agricultural, rural outreach for the campaign, which entailed, months later, I didn't realize this, writing the policy for the environmental policy for the Obama campaign in the early states. And so one thing leads to another. And then, of course, I'm interacting with all these folks that can help me because I don't know a damn thing. I'm talking to university professors. I'm talking to folks in the industry, nonprofit world. And one thing, I'm now writing environmental policy, having no background on this. And Obama eventually wins. And what do I'm thinking I'm going to go back to medical school. And instead, I continued on with the environmental policy bent and climate policy. And it's the most fascinating area. I mean, I think anybody who really loves their work finds their area to be the most fascinating. But clean energy, and especially as I've been on this journey, it has gone from a very important issue, very important domestic issue, some international consequence, to, I think, one of the most defining issues of our time. Um, not just because of the climate crisis, but because of all of the geopolitical layers that come with it. So that's sort of the origin story.
So you go to the White House, you're working for Barack Obama, who is a president that did not exactly have a reputation as being especially friendly to the fossil fuel industry, someone who made climate policy and renewable energy a focus of his administration. And yet, 2014, the US becomes the largest global producer of crude oil. By the time Barack Obama's administration came to an end, 2019, the US becomes a net exporter of energy for the first time in a long time. So, what do you think, looking back on the record of the Obama administration and the idea that during that time, we certainly saw a lot of progress when it came to green energy and renewable energy and clean energy, but the US has also been producing more and more fossil fuels over that same period?
Yeah, this is a great dynamic. We should be, at the time, I remember when this happened, we actually kept track of this. And it sounds weird for a climate advocate, tree hugger like myself to say this. We kept track of this closely as to when we would have more net exports, when we'd have a net more exports than imports on the oil side, because energy independence is incredibly important, incredibly important. And we should not be thinking about this entire subject in the realm of trading energy independence for clean energy dependence. And so this dynamic, part of what we're going to get into today, is so important. Barack Obama was, people probably wouldn't think of this, but he was so obsessed with removing red tape, so obsessed with making things more efficient in government. He wanted to get rid of this regulation or that regulation. And in fact, a lot of folks within the White House had to kind of hold him back from saying, look, this needs to be here for this reason, this needs to be here for this reason. Now, the reason why I bring that up is the thing that happened during the Obama administration that was quite important was in improving of the standards. The EPA set standards, that's transportation and power sector. And the sort of the most important thing that people forget is the Recovery Act. Within the Recovery Act, there was $80 billion or so. Much of it was basic science research. Much of it was establishing ARPA-E, which is the Advanced Research Projects Initiative at the Department of Energy. These set the stage for incredibly important advances in battery materials, in solar energy, in geothermal, carbon capture. That technology investment at the time of the Recovery Act was huge. So big credit to Steve Chu, then Secretary of Energy, and many others that helped implement that. That was a big deal. But your question is a good one, and it's a good one to keep in mind in terms of the way things have gotten a little bit out of whack in terms of the partisanship. As Democrats, and you can read my bio, so it's obvious that as a Democrat, we should cheer energy independence however we can get that, because we should be able to be both pro-American energy independence and also pro-climate solutions. Those need not be exclusive to each other. And that's, I think, at the heart of your question is, can we do both? And hell yeah, absolutely we can. And that's part of what is animating as well the Inflation Reduction Act. So we can get into that as well. But this is a really good question, but it's one that we should be leaning into rather than saying, wait a second, wait, the Obama administration supported more oil and gas. No, it supported energy independence, and that's very, very critical to our future.
So when people think about the idea of clean energy, I think what most often comes to mind are things like primarily solar power. People probably think of wind power as well. They maybe think of hydroelectric or geothermal. The one thing that often gets left out of this conversation is nuclear power. And there's been a lot of debate, not just in the United States, but also if you look at countries in Europe. Germany has gone one direction and has been basically shutting down its nuclear power plants. Other countries like France rely on it more heavily. A lot of the debate around nuclear, I think, tends to get dominated by looking back to disasters like Chernobyl or the one in Pennsylvania. And the idea that nuclear power can be a component of clean energy, the transition away from fossil fuels, has been sometimes a difficult sell, particularly to environmentalists. So what do you see the role of nuclear as being in the transition of the US and the world towards clean energy? Have we missed the boat to make that a big part of that transition, or is there still time to utilize that energy source more widely?
So as anybody, well, I know Jim and Ann, Nick's parents are from Georgia, but are any of you guys from Georgia or South Carolina here? So if you're from there, because this topic got a lot of attention in those two states because of the two nuclear plants being built, and one was approved 15 years ago by the U.S. government, 15 years ago. So just imagine all of the machinations that it takes to build one important nuclear plant in one state. The Chinese government last week approved 10 that are slightly bigger than the one, is it Vogel? I think that's the one in Georgia. One plant in Georgia. So it gives you a sense, and they're probably going to complete all of those within 18 months, not 15 years. So it's a wildly different scale, timeline, permitting regime. Now, I was part of the response team that had to work with the Japanese government after Fukushima. It's one of the ones you didn't mention. Disaster, absolute disaster. But there is so much that needs to be done in terms of decarbonizing and getting rid of nuclear as a solution. Existing nuclear, especially, is boneheaded. I mean, it's just dumb. The German government has done this, and I think, frankly, deserves derision for having shut down its nuclear facilities, because what are you replacing that with? And in Germany, yes, they've got a ton of solar that's come on the grid, but they've actually had to ramp up their coal production, which, by the way, is way worse, both for public health and for climate outcomes. So this is the trade-off that you have to have. What's the additionality that you're going to have to replace that with? And what's happening in the US is really exciting, actually. And not just in the US, also in Europe and many other places, including China. Last year, people don't even think about this, but 97% of our new energy generation in the United States of America was renewable. Much of that was solar. So people think these are sort of niche solutions. They're barely on the margins. No, these are coming at us quick. And it's capitalists that are the ones making this happen. It's not the tree huggers and the environmental advocates. It's people wanting to make money because they're a lot cheaper. Solar power is a lot cheaper. And now as storage solutions are becoming better and better and better, there's even more reason to invest there. So this is happening quick. Your question about nuclear is a good one, and it's one we should keep in mind. New nuclear fission, which is what Vogel is, very, very expensive. The reason why you don't see more of it, despite it being a great baseload power, is it is insanely expensive. The taxpayers, or the ratepayers, I should say, in Georgia are getting a feel for it, and in South Carolina, and right here maybe as well, huh? So they have to rate base it, and at some point, people are going to have to pay for that cost differential. When solar is so much cheaper and wind power is so much cheaper, that becomes very difficult to add the math up on it. So new nuclear fission is very unlikely, to be honest, or it'll be few and far between. The Chinese government can kind of make it work. Most other places won't. Now, nuclear fusion, on the other hand, I'm super bullish about. I'm very hopeful for. It's been the kind of thing that people have talked about as, it's happening in 5 years. And then next year, it's happening in 5 years. And then the next year, it's happening in 5. I think it actually is happening in 5 years. Now, you guys you can take this recording, and 5 years from now, somebody will tell me that I was wildly off. But there are tons of really interesting, important fusion startups, and much less environmentally taxing in terms of the waste product than is nuclear fission.
So you mentioned the idea of energy storage being a big part of kind of the future of clean energy policy and energy abundance in the United States. And we have an electrical grid, a power generation and distribution system that was designed for fossil fuels, where you're burning coal or using natural gas to generate electricity, and you kind of have sort of a constant stream coming from that plant. You can dial it up during times of peak demand. You can dial it down some when it comes to nighttime, when people are using less power. But particularly when it comes to solar, for instance, you're only generating power when the sun is shining. When it comes to wind, you're only generating power when the wind is blowing. And does that make grid storage and upgrading our electrical grid to make better use of these renewable sources an important step? Is that something that we're doing? Is it something that we can easily achieve? Or is that something that's going to be an obstacle to this transition to clean energy?
Oh, it's not going to be an obstacle at all. It's going to be going gangbusters. And it's a huge boon to ratepayers, and it's a huge boon to the resilience of our communities. So you have to think about energy storage. Energy storage was thought of as sort of the holy grail. How do you create a system where that efficiency is high enough and the costs are low enough that you can store energy and use it whenever it's the most valuable time to use it? And that's what's happening today. You look at the graphs on where lithium-ion battery storage. Now, there's plenty of other things that are also happening in the space, which we can get into if folks have questions about this, but there's plenty of other battery technologies. There's other long duration storage technologies. And so it's not just the lithium-ion batteries, but in this realm, the costs have plummeted. And what that means for electric utilities as they get more and more comfortable with using storage is it's when you said, oh, you can dial up and down a coal plant or a gas plant, that's actually not that easy. And it takes some planning. With batteries, it's literally an algorithm, often AI trained algorithm, and often just a software tool that doesn't even need human interaction that can do that immediately. When there's a voltage problem on the grid, boom, battery is already there. It's doing it before anybody even knows that there's the need. When prices are incredibly low, the battery can charge up. And when prices are incredibly high, the battery can discharge and actually make you cash on that differential. So it's like a leverage opportunity. So this realm is happening. It's already happening. You know, Ruby Red, Texas had the largest set of storage investments, the largest set of solar investments in the country by a lot. So if a place like Texas, very market economy based energy system, they're off on their own. They've got their own grid, and they're off on their own. If they're going quickly in the solar and storage direction, this is happening. It's just too economically favorable.
So piggybacking on that point about batteries, to me as a non-expert, kind of the perception when I look at this is that it seems like the battery technology is sometimes lagging behind the technology that the batteries are ultimately going to be used to power. Lithium-ion batteries were obviously a huge breakthrough. We have them in our iPhones, we have them in our Teslas and other electric vehicles. Are we getting close to the limits of lithium-ion batteries as a technology? And are there better battery technologies that are in development or potentially on the horizon?
So are we getting close to the limits? No. There's way more that's going to be done just on the existing technology, not even with really new, interesting chemistry. Part of the reason for that is so much of what's happening now is happening because of machine learning and AI. So those efficiency advancements are happening at a quicker and quicker and quicker pace. This is also true on the chip industry side. So that's definitely happening. And I'll give you a quick example. When in 2012, when the Tesla Model S came out, still an amazing car to my mind. At that time, I think the range was somewhere in the 220-mile range, something in that range. The same Tesla Model S, same weight, everything, actually with a slightly smaller battery, is getting 390 miles of range. Smaller battery, same car, almost twice the range. So it's not just the battery that's important in this realm. That goes for storage or for mobile storage of cars. It's the power electronics that goes with that. It's the systems engineering. It's the heat control, heat exchange controls. It's all of the other stuff too that can make these systems much more efficient, and that's what's happening. People are making great advances here.
So earlier you talked about one of the problems being with construction, at least of new nuclear power facilities, being all of the bureaucracy and the red tape and all of the hoops that you have to jump through to actually take one of those projects from planning to approval to completion.
Yeah.
And we see a lot of debate in Washington about this idea of permitting reform. Recently, Senators Joe Manchin, Independent of West Virginia, and Tom Barrasso, Republican of Wyoming, introduced a bipartisan energy permitting reform bill before Congress. And it seems to be an issue where there is, during our era of political polarization, kind of broad bipartisan consensus that permitting reform is something that we want to do and something that would be beneficial to the United States. What exactly is permitting reform, and what role do you see it playing in U.S. energy policy?
Great question. So permitting for any project, if any of you have gone through doesn't matter what, could be a home project where you need some county approvals or some city thing, could be a small business where you have a restaurant that has health permits or some other permits, or big permits like a big nuclear plant or a big factory. All of those have federal, state, and local permitting, and it can be, frankly, it makes you want to get out of the business that you're in and do other things that are not suitable for children. I mean, it can be incredibly frustrating. Now, what's important on the bill that you mentioned, but just generally in this realm, I feel like I'm cheating a little bit in both this answer and the reason why I've embraced permitting reform as much as I have personally. I've been pushing for this. I've been working with some of these folks before I left Tesla and after I left Tesla, and working with some of the advocates around permitting reform because I think it's so critical. But part of the reason why I say I'm cheating a little bit, I'm so excited about permitting reform now because clean energy solutions are winning on the merits. They're winning on the economics. They're winning anyways. The reason why environmentalists of the past have generally been really good, and sometimes for good reason, both for public health reasons and community reasons and other reasons, why they've been so good is at stopping projects, delivering laws, delivering permitting regimes, and delivering other types of that stop people in their tracks for a second, say, hey, we should check into this. We should look into this. We should make sure that this is the right thing, and have judicial review so that everybody can go back and sue you if you didn't get something right. That's what environmentalists have done, partly because our entire economy was being run as a fossil economy. Now, when we have a climate imperative that we have, and when we have an imperative vis-a-vis China, in terms of the competition with China, we have to be unleashed. The clean energy boom needs to be unleashed. And I don't mind, frankly, if a fossil fuel project can compete and gets the benefit of that permitting regime as well, because on balance, clean energy is cheaper and better and smarter, and the utility sector, the transportation sector, the industrial economy will see that, and clean energy will win. So I feel like I'm cheating because I kind of know the answer to the test. We're going to win. Clean energy is going to win. And so I want to be unleashed in terms of permitting reform to make that happen. Now, on the fossil side, shoot, if they can get something done and they can make sense of it and they can make the ratepayers or the economics work, all the more power to them. great, go deliver that and use that same permitting form. That's the balance. So that's why John Barrasso from Wyoming, big fossil fuel state, especially coal, is totally fine with this bill. On the other hand, you've got a lot of Democrats and a lot of clean energy advocates saying, yeah, let's go, we need more of this. So that's kind of the dynamic that's happening.
So continuing the theme then of legislation and what Congress has been doing on this front recently, we saw two, I think, really important pieces of legislation during President Obama's term. First, there was the Inflation Reduction Act, which, despite its name, is probably much more of an energy bill and a climate bill than it is an inflation reduction bill. And then we had the Chips and Science Act as well. What is the importance of those two pieces of legislation, and perhaps the IRA in particular, to clean energy policy and towards moving towards a future of energy abundance?
So it's a great question. This is the defining set of issues, I think, that we will face. There will be issues of war and peace that are incredibly important. Nuclear disarmament, insanely important. Lots of other issues. But these two industrial policies are defining the way that the world works together on both chips and on clean tech. And up until now, up until just 2 years ago, the US had, the United States government had a, let's dabble in this thing, let's sprinkle a little pixie dust over here, let's throw a little bit of cash here, but no serious industrial policy. Maybe for good. Globalism was taking shape. Over time, the world was becoming more connected, more interconnected. That's a good thing. But it was only now that the US government and the Congress, both in one bipartisan stroke and another in a partisan stroke, decided, let's get into the business of real industrial policy on clean tech products and on chips. And this has not happened before. So you combine this with tariffs. So Trump, during President Trump's regime, he had put into place some of the most incredibly difficult tariffs to navigate for any company. Widespread tariffs on pretty much everything, anything you can think of. There was probably a tariff on it. It was coming from China. And also tariffs on steel and aluminum and other products from other places, including our allies. So let's just say broad-based tariffs, regardless of what product and what, not strategically focused. Let's just say they were anti-China. In industrial policy, instead of using the stick, you're using the carrot, and you're trying to get folks to do what you think is really important from a national security perspective. And chips and clean tech products, battery cells, critical minerals, rare earth minerals, these things, we have really lost the ability to manufacture, refine, process, mine in the United States of America. And we've lost the ability to produce batteries and produce chips in the same way that we used to. And the reason why this is so important, and it can be a little bit frustrating for those that have been around for a while, is these are technology advances, generally speaking, certainly in the chips industry and also in the battery cell industry mostly, that are US research institution based. The great labs in the Department of Energy that are associated with universities, our university systems and research produced some of the seminal materials that went into making these chips and creating these advances. And yet we've seen our lunch eaten by others. And so we're back in the game now, as of a couple of years ago, but we've got to get smarter and smarter and smarter about the combination of industrial policy and tariff policy.
So you mentioned China. China obviously is the elephant in the room in a lot of conversations about geopolitics, conversations about climate change. China is a country that has also been investing heavily in renewables, and they have been investing heavily in electric vehicle manufacturing with BYD Auto, the state-sponsored in many ways Chinese electric vehicle manufacturer, releasing a vehicle last year that retails for around $12,000 in China. So a vehicle that is vastly more affordable than really anything that's being produced by US manufacturers. The Biden administration responded by announcing steep tariffs on China, 100% on electric vehicles, 50% on semiconductors and solar cells, 25% on lithium-ion batteries. This has been part of a movement that began in the Trump administration towards the use of tariffs as a much more prominent tool in America's trade relationships, particularly with China. Are tariffs the appropriate way to respond to growing competition from China in this market? And what do you see the effect of China's entry into the electric vehicle market being on companies like Tesla and other manufacturers of those vehicles?
I mean, short answer is yes. But there's so much nuance to this. So short answer is yes. In my view, we cannot cede this territory to the Chinese Communist Party or to any other government. It has nothing to do with whether it's China, it could be somebody else, could be Japan, Korea, Europe. We cannot cede this future if we care about America. So that piece to me is non-negotiable. We must invest in these technologies and we must invest in this manufacturing capacity for national security reasons. So that's number one to me. But there's a longer answer on the tariff question, which is for anyone that's ever done any business before the WTO or even thought about the WTO or read anything about the WTO, the World Trade Organization, it is an absolutely horrible nightmare. I mean, that organization doesn't know what the heck it's doing. It's basically a lost cause at this point, to me. And because it's so slow in being able to react to changes and actions, and it's a long litigation process around things, by the time the WTO has done anything about some kind of trade problem, already the problem is exacerbated to the point where businesses have shut down, manufacturing has deceased, supply chains have retreated. So it's not a solve. So I think I have to give President Trump credit in addressing or at least thinking about the problem in the right way. Now, the nuance there is that these things are very complicated. So for example, President Trump, his tariffs placed a 25% tariff on any raw materials coming in from China. So pretty much everything, silicon oxide, lithium, a whole bunch of lithium hydroxide, lots of other things that go into making a battery cell or a cathode. He placed a 8% tariff on the fully finished battery pack coming from China. The opposite of what you would think to do if you were trying to get a good manufacturing policy in place, because you want raw materials coming in at the lower tariff so that you can have value-added manufacturing on top that creates more jobs and creates more innovation. That's the opposite of what they did. Now, I don't even think that they intended to do it that way, frankly, but this is the way that tariffs that are not created with serious nuance, in my view, we should add on top of that, this could be a whole discussion unto its own, a carbon adjustment that would also put China in more of a retreat and be a little bit more aggressive in this way, because the US grid is decarbonizing like crazy. So having a carbon adjustment on top of that tariff would increasingly make the US more competitive. And I think Europe is already moving this direction anyways. So it would sort of marry up our economies in addition to Australia. So these are things that are incredibly difficult topics. Tariffs, because of what the Chinese Communist government is doing, we have no choice, in my view. But those tariffs need to be done with care and with regard to US businesses that are trying to create manufacturing jobs here.
So one other recent development which has had a major effect on policy and diplomacy in this area has been the Russian invasion of Ukraine back in 2022. And it was just reported in the Wall Street Journal recently that the Nord Stream pipeline that supplied Germany and other European countries from Russia was destroyed by Ukraine as part of their response to the Russian invasion. What effect did the Russian invasion have on global energy supply generally? Obviously, this has been devastating to places like Germany. Has the U.S. been insulated by that from the fact that we have been so good at increasing our production, or are we feeling the effects in the energy sector from that invasion here as well?
We're a little bit I mean, the U.S. has been the most protected from the shocks of the Ukraine war in terms of the energy sector. Europe had a crazy wild winter. That first winter especially, uh, home heating prices went berserk, and partly because of the pipeline capacity and shutdown, but some of that got released. So the U.S. decided to ramp up LNG exports. Russia had a glut of oil, and I think the U.S. government kind of looked the other way when India said, "We need some of that cheap oil. Let's go get even more of it from Russia than they otherwise would." So this has kind of come back into balance, even despite the war continuing as it is. But the one thing that I would say that it has brought into more of a full focus, especially in Europe, is the need to be resilient, each country, but also Europe as a whole. So the investment space and the way that they're thinking about this, including in terms of energy independence, you saw this just recently. European Union tacked on a major tariff onto electric vehicles coming from China. It's not the first thing they're going to do in this realm. They're going to do lots more of this. Same reasons as what I just mentioned. They want to be energy resilient to grid shocks, could be a natural disaster, or it could be a war like the one that Putin is waging. And they want to have that dependence from potential foreign adversaries like a China. And so what's happening in Europe is the same thing that's happening here, which is that some of these clean energy products that China has built up being flooded. They're flooding the markets where they have access. You mentioned China's buildup in terms of manufacturing capacity. Just to give you a statistic here. Does anybody know how many cars are sold in the United States, approximately? Anybody in the audience know to an approximation? It's 15 million or so a year, okay? The US has, give or take, approximately the same amount of production capacity. China had about the same production capacity a few years back, a lot less years before that. Today, it has 50 million, a 50 million capacity to build cars yearly in China. Now, with their domestic economy ramping down, where are they going to sell those cars? They're going to be dumping those cars somewhere. So they've been trying to do that in Europe. Europe's shutting that down. They've applied a tariff. They're going to be doing that in Southeast Asia and wherever they have market capacity to do so. So I think it's important, to your point before about tariffs, I think it is important to make sure that the US government is not swamped by heavily subsidized Chinese goods.
So we've talked quite a bit about the technology that will help the transition to clean energy, whether it's batteries, whether it's chips, whether it's solar panels. I want to shift focus to think a little bit about the raw materials that go into manufacturing those, particularly when it comes to the rare earth metals, things like lithium, things like cobalt. Resources that are somewhat more scarce, perhaps, than or harder to obtain or to create an effective supply chain for. How do those metals and those raw materials factor into this equation when it comes to transitioning more fully to an economy that's based on clean energy?
It's a great question. All of these things tie together. So permitting is a big one on this. We got to get better permitting if we want to actually enable processing, refining, and mining, not just here, but in our friendly countries, Canada, Mexico, South America. We got to do more in this realm. But you mentioned rare earths, and I love this because it's such a misnomer. Rare earths are actually incredibly abundant. I don't know why the hell we call them rare earths. There must be a good reason. Somebody can Wikipedia that. It's It makes no sense that we call them rare earths. They're everywhere. There's tons of rare earths in the United States today, great deposits in California, Minnesota, and many other places. We haven't dug them up because it's very environmentally taxing to do so. And so China has a stranglehold on the rare earth mining and production. But what the Inflation Reduction Act has done, and great innovation by lots of folks, including in academia, we are seeing more and more technologies where we can get away from rare earths in the magnet space and other spaces. This is a big deal. On the critical minerals, I think it's important to think about the percentages here as well. So today, where do you guys think most of our oil comes from? Where are most of the oil reserves? 80% of our oil reserves globally are in OPEC. And the vast majority of OPEC is autocratic regimes. Now, the flip side, people are very worried about lithium and where's lithium. 80% of the lithium reserves that exist, that we know about, are in democracies worldwide. So this is just one example. Nickel is actually quite a similar story. So this is, in the critical minerals space, we have a chance to boost our interdisciplinary collaborations. And we have a really important foreign policy objective here, because some of our closest allies, Australia is one of the richest places for lithium and nickel. Canada has wild reserves of copper, nickel, lithium, and many other materials that we need for the clean energy transition. We've got these materials in the United States that currently have mining capacity. We need better permitting reform on this front. So this critical minerals and supply chain front is going to be hugely important, because what China has done better than anyone else is the government has supported these. It's not just the support for the name brand retail that you may have heard of, that you might be going to buy in an EV showroom or in a solar showroom. It's instead the 20 rungs of supply chain and the supply base that exists, and China has built that up. Built it up close to where the factories are, built up an entire ecosystem. You mentioned the $12,000 car. That's the reason. It's not the labor costs. People have this completely wrong idea that it's labor costs that are the reason why it's cheaper in China. No, labor costs are a very small component, especially in a car, of the overall labor, of the overall cost of the vehicle. So it's the manufacturing capacity, it's the supply chain, it's the closeness, the logistics costs. All of those things mean a lot. So this is going to be one of the most important spaces, but especially in the clean energy transition, this is one of the places where I'm most excited about, because I think it has a huge, I think it will have a transformative impact in a lot of different places where we have great and longstanding allies and partnerships.
We're in the middle of an election campaign right now, and you have experience not just in the White House itself as a policy advisor, but also working on a presidential campaign. And while polls suggest that energy is not the top issue on the minds of voters, it's nevertheless something that consistently cracks the top 10. People are concerned mostly about affordability. They're concerned with gas prices, utility prices. They're concerned with the price of heating their homes. If you were advising the Harris campaign right now, what would you be telling her to say about energy policy? And what do you think the approach of her administration should be for the next 4 years, should she win the election in November?
So, unfortunately, I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but unfortunately, two very different things. Campaigns and policymaking. I told you at the beginning of this that I wrote this environmental policy document, and you can still find it. It's actually kind of laughable, because I don't think the Obama administration did a single darn thing that I wrote down. Not even one thing. So, campaigns and what you say in a campaign and how you can get elected are important. It's an important thing in terms of general priorities, and it's an important thing for general direction of where you're going and how you can develop support for those policies going forward. But the specifics are so nuanced and so incredibly detailed and so difficult to get through in a campaign format or in a political ad that's not possible. So I guess what I would say in terms of how you can develop and deploy a campaign strategy, it's more the campaign strategy to me in the Harris campaign that I think they're doing quite well, seemingly doing incredibly well right now, is a future versus past kind of dynamic. So you show Kamala Harris in front of a geothermal facility or solar panels with new battery technology or newfangled EV or something like that, with people that are working in that industry around her. And that looks like the future. And Donald Trump is trying to revive a coal plant that has been shut down for 20 years and has no hope of ever being revived. So this is the kind of political picture that you want to paint if you're a Democrat. As a Republican, you want to paint the picture that these crazy left-wing tree huggers are trying to subsidize the crap out of your friend's Tesla, and we're going to pit one against the other to say, stop subsidizing my neighbor. And so that's the kind of political talk you're going to hear more about. Now, in terms of Harris in the White House or Trump in the White House, you take both of them. You didn't ask me about Trump, but I'll say it anyways. Harris, she's got to have the spine of steel when it comes to this set of policies, because when you're doing industrial policy and you're the Chinese Communist Party, you can fail and nobody's going to do anything about it. They can't vote you out. You're there forever. Or, who knows? In the US context, if you fail once, and trust me, I had to go through this in the Obama years with a company called Solyndra. Ironically, I joined Tesla and we actually bought the Solyndra facility, and the manufacturing facility was right across the street from the Tesla factory in Fremont. But I had to go up in front of Congress and talk about Solyndra and talk about why this was an important investment at the time and what our thoughts were about it. But there's going to be lots of that. There are going to be failures. 100% there will be companies that cannot survive. And that's okay. In fact, we should be making mistakes. We should be trying out new technologies. We should be giving some of these technologies a chance to survive and get through the valley of death. And so that's part of industrial policy, but that takes a lot of guts, takes a lot of backbone, and it takes a lot of political capital to say, despite what the opposition is saying, that you wasted all this money and you did this and that, you're going to keep going forward because you believe that it's the right thing to do for the country and for our foreign policy needs and security. So that's the thing I hope for with Harris. With Trump, I think there's a lot that I dislike about what I think he's going to do and what he did in the past. But on the question of permitting reform, there's a potential that a Republican administration will have more impact and do more in this realm than a Democratic administration. We'll see. It'll sort of depend on the mix in Congress. But there's a potential that Trump actually would be better on the permitting reform agenda than a Democratic administration. Hard to know, but I think that's a generally good bet.
Okay, I have one more question for you before we open things up to the audience and give them an opportunity to ask you what's on their mind. Elon Musk, you worked for him for a number of years, worked with him. He's known as the driving force behind some incredibly successful American companies. He, along with Peter Thiel and others, turned PayPal into a billion-dollar company. He founded SpaceX, the company that basically single-handedly saved the American space program when NASA started running the shuttle missions and we were relying on Russia in order to supply the rockets to get our astronauts to the ISS. And then, of course, Tesla, the company that you worked for 8 years. But in recent years, I think there's been a perception, and in particular, since Elon bought Twitter and has become increasingly political, that his focus has, in some sense, drifted away a little bit from those companies, in particular Tesla. What do you see the future of Tesla as a company being at this point? And do you think that Elon Musk still has the ability and the focus and the energy to continue to lead Tesla moving forward and to continue the amazing record of success that he has had with Tesla and other companies throughout his career?
A lot of ways I could take this one. So yeah, he's a remarkable guy, and I was lucky, super lucky. He empowered me a lot. I reported to him for 6 years, and you know, when you're working on a project that's really important to the company and to the company's future, he's right there next to you, driving as fast and as much as he possibly can, and trying to get every last effort out. And so I was a part, or leading a couple of those big projects. And so, but I came in as the guy who was the regulatory and policy person that knew something about EPA regs, knew something about some of our DOE programs. And I left Tesla. He had me running our site selection program for factories, doing business development partnerships for the company globally. I mean, he totally empowered me to do a whole bunch of things that I wouldn't have otherwise gotten to do. And he's done that with a lot of folks. And part of the special sauce there is an ability to get people set a wild goal. We're going to land a rocket booster in a ship in the middle of the ocean that's traveling at wild speeds, and do so perfectly time after time after time. There's no other company on the planet that's doing that. SpaceX has been doing it for years now. The ability to say, we are going to build this factory in 10 months, and I'm going to be there talking to not the governor of the state or not the president of the country, but with the person actually doing the permitting work directly. So I think his ability to both go all the way deep on the smallest thing that matters to that, and also to come out of that and say what's really important is maybe unparalleled. And on Tesla, I think, look, my hope is that at Tesla has spawned a lot of different copycats. It's spawned a lot of different folks from Tesla, within Tesla, and outside of Tesla that are doing things in this realm, excited people about this work. And so I hope that that's a lasting legacy. I also think he's made a big bet on AI. Not just Elon, but the company has made a big bet on AI. Huge investments in AI hardware and software. And that means a huge part of the business itself is moving towards AI development, robotaxi development, Optimus, which is the robot development. That's a much, much bigger focus. All the while, largest set of energy storage deployments that's ever been seen, 3x increase over last year. So I think they can walk and chew gum at the same time, but we'll see. And I mean, I'll be rooting for them.
Well, Rohan, thank you. I appreciate you answering my questions. We will open things up at this point to our audience members. If you would like to come up to one of the 2 microphones on the left and right of the stage to ask your question, you can go ahead and do so. In the meantime, we also have a gift for Rohan, which is a bag of UNF swag provided by the UNF College and Arts and Sciences. In appreciation for him giving his time to come and talk to us.
That's awesome. Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. That was a great talk. I usually zone out for things, but I actually tracked everything you said. So good job. When we think about the election of 2024, of course, there's 3 particular things we look at. You look at the Senate, you look at the House, and you look at the White House. Assuming that Democrats get the House and the White House, but they don't secure the Senate, how much work can be done by a Harris administration, particularly with the legislative achievements of the Biden administration related to the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act?
Well, so two things that there, less can be done when you have divided government, but more important things can potentially get done. And I say that because in divided government, and I love the way our founders have set up our democracy. It's quite a bit different than the democracies that you have, the parliamentary systems, and they're all a little bit different. So it's I don't want to lump everybody together, but the parliamentary systems in Europe are quite a bit different. Generally speaking, in Europe, you have a mandate, and that prime minister comes in, or president, they can get whatever they want done. Again, I'm simplifying a little bit, but basically they have a mandate for the time that they're there. They own the government. Here, we've got so many layers. We have a House, we have a Senate, unfortunately, with a filibuster. You got a president that still has to sign the thing. You've got the judicial system that's quite active in the US versus elsewhere. So the amount of checks and balances that we have, I think, is really good. You want to be slightly frustrated, and only sometimes when you really have core agreement can you get stuff done. So we complain a lot about, oh man, there's so much dreadlock in Washington, there's dreadlock in Tallahassee. The truth to me is that's actually a sign of the greatness of the US democracy and all the fail safes that we have. Now, I'm overstating it a little bit. We need to get good stuff done. I think there's a chance that that really good immigration bill, and there's lots of problems with any immigration. There's problems with any bill, but there are going to be problems with this immigration bill as well. I think there's a chance that real immigration reform could get done in divided government, as you just suggested. So I think there's a real chance of that.
Just to clarify, though, particularly with the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, as an executive branch, what can a Harris administration do with that legal framework?
It's all important to me. I mean, this is like the ability to undo things is really hard. Once a law is passed in the United States, very rare that it gets undone. Sometimes they set up expiration dates for tax policy and other types of policies, but generally speaking, it's really hard to undo things, and that's for a reason as well. So the only way to undo those pieces of legislation is if you have complete control by the opposition party. Even when you have that, let's remember what happened with Obamacare. The Republicans had full control, Senate, House, and Trump. Everybody assumed, well, Obamacare is dead. Turns out the American people actually kind of like Obamacare. And John McCain shows up in the Senate and does this and thwarts their plans. They didn't have a backup, so I think it actually helped Trump and others in the end that they didn't get rid of this incredibly popular package. So I think the power of having Harris in the White House, or having one of the two branches, is that you can stop the craziness from taking place. You can stop a lot of the crazy rollbacks or problems that you might otherwise see. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a question about, or there were two topics I've read about recently. One is Vermont's Green Mountain Power plan to give away battery packs to various neighborhoods. And the proposal would be by 2030, they would have no more outages from weather-related events by having these batteries throughout various neighborhoods. And the idea being that one battery wall could supply power to several neighbors, and you get enough of them, then you don't have to build any more power plants. You don't have to worry about replacing electric power lines that go down, because the grid basically is spread out. And the other is what do you think about the problem we have in the United States on this tug of war between solar and wind, when one windmill can supply the equivalent of 7 football fields worth of solar cells? Thanks.
Great set of questions. What's your name, sir?
Art Billingsley.
Okay, I honestly do not know Art Billingsley, but my former team at Tesla, they're obviously, this is not live, but if they were watching, they would think that I planted this question.
Oh,
Your first one,
okay.
because my team was partially responsible for that program in Green Mountain Power, and I am a huge believer in virtual power plants and the power of virtual power plants. What you described, when you hear this terminology, virtual power plant, what you described is a virtual power plant. It's a distributed set of storage devices. Doesn't have to be just storage, but that's the easiest one to think about. Distributed across homes, businesses, universities, could be anywhere. That the utility or some operator with good software capability can operate. When there's a need on the grid, or even before there's a need on the grid, you can deploy those resources quickly. And they give, when there's an outage, the homeowner themselves has the storage plus solar, so they can go through that outage with no problem. So it gives both a local resilience aspect and a grid-based resilience aspect, both of which are incredibly important. Green Mountain Power was first out of the gate years ago, 2017 actually. That program is old. Now they're getting back into it and reinvigorating it. But others are coming on its tail quickly. And so utilities want to see this, because why would a utility care about this kind of thing? The reason why utilities care is they don't want the huge costs of building another plant, or in some cases, depending on the state, building out the transmission. So they can rate base some of that, they can get good rates of return on some of that, but avoiding those costs in the first place are even better. So they don't mind creating this distributed virtual power plant. So that's on your, what was the second one again? I forget. Solar versus wind. Well, so there's two different things going on there, right? There's locational resilience and grid-based resilience. So there's some places where it makes a ton of sense to have wind energy. If you're sitting in Iowa, you're sitting in Oklahoma, sitting in parts of Texas, offshore, lots of wind makes a ton of sense. But oftentimes where the wind is the best, you don't have population centers. And so you need great ways to get that energy transmitted. You need transmission lines, and that goes back to permitting reform. Very hard to get transmission built in the United States. People don't want it in their backyard. So that's number one. You don't have that luxury necessarily. Number two, on solar, it's just cheaper. So even though yes, you need more fields, and yes, it's easier to permit, you can put it on roofs. So that's another piece where you have very low utilization of these roofs. They're not doing anything. You can get them up on rooftops. You can put it on old, dumps, landfills. You can put it in places where you can't necessarily cite wind or geothermal or other things. So I'm a huge fan of solar. I'm also a huge fan of utilizing our land in the best way. So let's not necessarily use solar on the beautiful landscapes of this country. Let's put it in the worst looking places of the country and put it on top of roofs.
So climate change denialism, which is this kind of relatively loud minority, do you think that they serve as a serious hurdle to climate change policies, like whether it be from like the voter consistency based and priorities or policies actually passed by politicians, or do you think that they're mostly an issue when it comes to media talk and not so much tangibly policy?
No, it's a huge problem. I feel a little bit responsible. I mean, we had at the time in 2012, there was no major political party on planet Earth that had a climate denialist platform. If you just rewind 6 years before that, John McCain and Lindsey Graham were writing climate change legislation that today would be considered far left wing. That's just in 2006. This is not that long ago. And that's the core of the Republican Party at that time. You rewind further back, the basis for what we have as an environmental protection agency signed into law by Richard Nixon. Fast forward a little bit, you have George H.W. Bush putting forward some of the most important environmental protections that we have in terms of acid rain and the like. So this has been historically a very bipartisan issue. The question of conserving our land and protecting our air and water, very bipartisan issue. This is only a very recent historical anomaly where we have a party that's shifted a little bit, and I think we'll get that back, but it'll take some time. And the question of climate denialism is incredibly, it's strange, it's weird. And it's being funded. In the US, we have the ability to put issue ads out there and a lot of disinformation campaigns out there. And so industry is funding quite a bit of that, sadly. So yeah, it does impact things. It's forced more executive action than I think is necessary. It's forced states. This is a kind of a good outcome of a crazy situation, but it's forced states to really get more creative. So you see more and more states getting more and more creative in terms of climate action and in terms of clean energy than they would have otherwise, because the federal government usually can fill that void. So there's some pluses and minuses, but on the whole, it's quite depressing to see that take foothold amongst a certain population in terms of this climate denial. This doesn't exist. When you go to any major, I mean, I'm talking about whether you're in Nairobi. So as a part of my job at Tesla, I mean, I was all over the place, Thailand and Korea, DRC, all over. I mean, there's a full-on thought process to try to take advantage of the clean energy economy and move forward with climate action. There's varying degrees of what they can do and what they want to do and what they're willing to do with certain restrictions. But generally speaking, this is not a debate that's happening elsewhere. But it is here, and we need to have it, and we need to defeat that weird mindset that's out there.
So part of my question was asked by the gentleman over there about distributed generation. There seems to be a bad climate in this state, the Sunshine State. What do you think of that?
One of the first things that my team was doing, and I had to try to get up to speed on it, was fighting the local utility that you have here in terms of what was allowed and the types of restrictions that were coming into place, and some of the work that was happening in Tallahassee to restrict the ability to put rooftop solar up. And so I know this topic very well, both in terms of the Florida specific stuff and generally how it's happening. But over time, I think utilities are starting to come to grips with that. In our system, we have the craziest system, but it's a mix of municipal utilities. You have that in Jacksonville, some co-ops, which are sort of nonprofits that operate as a utility, and investor-owned utilities, both competitive and uncompetitive depending on the state. Here in Florida, you've got a combo of the Jacksonville, as I said, the munis, and you've got FP&L and a few other utilities. And historically, the way they've looked at this situation is every solar panel that's up on a roof means less electrons that we're selling the customer, right? That's the way they've looked at it. Increasingly, that is changing, and this is a very good thing. They're looking at this based on the overall economic best interest for the utility as, well, we need to avoid having to build another set of expenditures and going back to the well with a PUC to ask for more rate increases. So there's an embrace, a slight embrace, not a full bear hug, but a slight embrace of some of the some distributed technologies and virtual power plants in places where we just were not expecting it. And I think that's a very, very good thing.
I mean, it blows me away that we went to my wife's hometown of Rensselaer, sunny Rensselaer, Indiana, and you land in Indy in the clover field. Clover leaves at the airport are giant solar farms.
Yeah.
Her little city has 2 solar farms. And down here in sunny Florida, I think I've only seen 1.
Yeah, there's not enough. There's not enough. That's going to change.
I just wanted to say that it's been fantastic hearing from you, first and foremost, but this ties into the climate denial question quite a bit. There's just been, I feel in my personal opinion, that there's been a lot of science denial just in general. I have coworkers that have denied the moon landing, which is absurd. And I feel like there's been an erosion recently of just any acceptance of policy towards working towards the climate crisis. And I feel like it's only getting worse as we're in an election year. And I was wondering, do you see any possible way that maybe people who deny the science or deny the climate change could maybe be brought into wanting to seek action?
Yeah, I do. I'm super excited about this question too, because this kind of comes back to the heart of this whole discussion. Why would somebody make a choice to say, I previously thought we ought to be building more coal plants, and I previously thought we should be importing more oil from Saudi Arabia and producing more oil in the United States and buying internal combustion engines. Why would they then make the choice to say, well, actually, I kind of like this other thing more? And yeah, maybe I don't necessarily care that much about what's happening with this global climate change thing that's not that easy to understand, frankly, and the effects of it are so distributed and can be so difficult in one place and non-existent in another place. Why? Well, the reason why is that the solutions are cool, fun, better, cheaper, and there's jobs associated with them. A lot of jobs. I mean, Tesla was famous for leaving California during the pandemic. I don't know if you probably read a little bit about that. We left California and added 25,000 jobs in the state of California during the time we were leaving. The amount of necessary work within this sphere, especially in the distributed space, but in all realms, it will be the largest amount of investment we've seen in many generations, is this clean energy advancement and push towards sustainability. So it's an incredible moment. It's an incredible time if you're a student in this realm, because there's so much activity happening across every sector. You might be from a farm, care about agriculture, tons of climate science happening in ag econ, ag science, agricultural engineering. If you're hardcore into cars, well, obviously there's tons happening there. You really care about the energy system, you really care about industrial system, there's stuff happening in this realm everywhere. So the jobs that are being created across the spectrum in all parts of the supply chain, up and down, and with our allies, it's a big component of, I think, why people will make those decisions and change. I'll give you one example, just one quick example. There's a company that's being run by a very close friend of mine, former Tesla person. They're doing long duration storage. It's a specific iron air type of storage. And they decided, partly because of the story, but partly because of the logistics, to locate on literally on an old coal mine in West Virginia. That factory that they're building and that they're already employing 10 times more people than the coal mine employed when it was last open. So if you start to show that this is a reality and people feel it because their friends and neighbors are experiencing it, that's a whole different thing than some dude like me up on a stage like this saying that some great thing is happening. People need to feel it in their communities. They need to feel it in their hearts. They need to feel that their culture is a part of this as well. That's when that type of change unlocks. So one more example, because it's my hometown. I'm from the RV capital of the world. The RV Hall of Fame is like half a mile from my house. And we experienced the worst of the economic recession. Highest unemployment of any county in America was Elkhart County. And they're very skeptical of this whole clean energy thing, climate thing. What are we doing here? All of a sudden, there's an RV maker that's doing some electric work, and it's taken off. There's a pontoon boat maker that's going and doing electric work, and it's starting to get orders like crazy. And I'm hearing chitter chatter from my friends, high school friends. Oh my God, Rohan, can you believe this thing? It's really taking off. So that's the thing that changes people's minds, I think.
I've got a quick one for you. Nice change. So, as Americans, we're constantly used to companies getting our attention to get us to vote or to think or to act a certain way. How many of these green or clean energy solutions that we're seeing are just the most profitable versions of going about the same problem? Are there any more monetarily friendly options to going about changing our climate issue?
So this is a good question. I think it's important. It's especially in this realm, it's important to be a very discerning consumer, but this is true for anything, right? You shouldn't invest in a home or a car or energy product or an HVAC system or anything without doing a lot of homework. And are there going to be, just as there were nefarious people doing oil heating in the Northeast or doing, diesel generators out here, there's going to be nefarious folks doing the same thing on clean energy products. I'm not going to sell you a bill of goods saying that everybody selling solar is some great human. That's not going to be the case. So you got to be careful. But I'd say the thing that's most important is, does it work as well or better? And does it save you money over time? And those two things, increasingly, the reason why Tesla is actually as successful as it is up until now is because people have made that call. They like the car better as it is, separate and apart from whether they're saving any money. They like the car better. And on clean energy products, the reason why people are going solar and adding storage and getting heat pumps, it's because it's working better for them and for their families. And it's cheaper. So if that's the case, and if more and more people find that to be the case, it's viral. You're going to tell your family, you're going to tell your brother, sister, uncle. That's the way that this kind of thing happens. It's not going to be because some great, salesman got you to buy something. Before you do that, you're probably going to ask your friends and family, hey, have you thought about getting this thing or this product or this appliance? So that's the way more and more people are buying things in any event. So it'll work or it won't work, and companies are going to live or die based on that.
Okay, so as a student and someone just starting to learn about politics a little bit more and more wanting to, and also hearing about how you were a violinist growing up until you just changed and went into the political scheme and going into all this environmental stuff. I was curious on how can I, as a citizen, be more informed about what's actually going on environmentally and economically? Because you bring up a lot of points about how these environmental issues tie into the economics of like trying to, like, a big concern is trying to make things as cheap as possible. And someone who wants to do more for the environment, I know like the economics is a very real part. So I was kind of curious to ask you, how did you learn going from becoming a violinist to like starting to learn more about the politics and the ins and outs of the economy and how this, like, all works, I guess.
Well, I said this earlier, so I guess I'm gonna repeat myself for those of you that were there. First, if you've already done one thing that's smart, you're here at UNF and you're hopefully taking some classes that you like with professors that you like and with students that are also interested in some of those same things. That in and of itself, you've already taken a very smart first step. But the key is like actually finding the thing that you care about most and that you really get excited to wake up in the morning and think about. Because then you're going to be interested in every damn book you can find, every article that you can read, every person that has some interesting thing to say about it. And your focus then can start to get to the point where you're asking the right questions. First thing that you've got to do is ask the right questions. And so I think you're already in a good place as it is. You're here on a university campus. You're at a talk like this. I mean, I think it's really important to actually show up, talk to people, talk to your professors, talk to folks that actually care about this stuff and that know, and then number two, after you do that, number two is ask for help. People that know something or have something to offer, people that have gone through something before. The most amazing thing that you kind of realize once you get a little bit of courage to be able to do it, because it's not that easy to ask people for help, is once you do, you'll be so surprised and so excited about the reaction that people want to help. They want to help you. And once you build, and it's not just one person, you want to build a whole cadre of people around you that are supporting you, that are helping you, that are finding opportunities, that are telling you to go read this thing, that are encouraging you to go take the next step and try this other thing. So asking for help and building out that mentor capacity, let's say, around yourself is, I think, really, really important for any of us.
And then I also had a follow-up question as well. So also in terms of just the common citizen, common citizen, like, I know not everybody has the time to like research all of this sometimes. And a big problem, like we hear somebody mention like climate denial or people not listening to the science, or just generally people not being as informed about what's happening in the climate or what's happening economically, leads to different, I guess, beliefs and what's actually going on. And I was kind of curious from your perspective, since you mentioned people need to be more creative in um, discussing these issues, how, in your opinion, are the common citizens supposed to like become informed citizens to know what's actually going on with the environment and economically, so we can vote and be aware of like, yeah, what's going on? When like sometimes in the media, when you're going on like CNN, sometimes like in public health, people don't have enough time to talk about all the scientific stuff that's going on or the economic sides of it, if that makes sense at all.
No, it makes a ton of sense. I spent a lot of time thinking about this and working on this problem. We got a grant. When I say we enabled a grant from the Bloomberg Foundation to help train and work with weathercasters, so your local weather stations. And the thought process there was that I mean, certainly people my age and older for sure know or remember their local weather guy. Usually it was a weather guy. And they remember those people. They generally trust those people. Today, I mean, you're looking at your phone. You don't need much in terms of the weather channel or weather people. But we did this training, and so now when you watch the Weather Channel or when you're watching a hurricane thing, you're watching your local news, likely that person has been through a whole climate training about how to actually talk about the thing they already know and how to talk about it in a creative way. Same thing we did with the public health sector, which is that the public health sector knows about the climate problem in a way, in a much more compelling way than someone like myself. If you're a doctor that's seeing patients, seeing asthma patients, lung disease patients in places that are impacted, you're seeing ozone levels that are significant, and you're seeing the impacts of disease vectors that are different as a result of climate change. You have an ability to speak about that with way more authority than someone like myself. So getting people comfortable and actually talking about climate change in their own respective regime, in their own respective expertise areas, really important. And I think that's just one strategy where I think it's having some impact. We got to do more of that.
I think we have time for one more question, so go ahead, sir, and then I'm afraid we're gonna be out of time.
Okay. My name is Krista, and I just wanted to ask you about what do you think would be like the best solution, moving forward, just like what would depend majority on for energy here, like for us in America, just considering the limitations before with solar and wind, and also that we need something quick, that can be applied on this large scale with like the competition from China.
Excellent question. I'm going to do a quick two-parter. One is, it's worth checking out saveoncleanenergy.org. Tons of things that people don't really know about that they can save on. Either there's government help, there could be state-related help, utility-related help to deploy those same clean energy solutions that that the government is trying to get out there, and that utility is trying to get out there, and companies are trying to get out there. So that's one thing. There's a lot of different websites. That one I think is pretty good to check out. On the second part, big things that can sort of leapfrog is kind of the way that you're framing this question. I think I mentioned nuclear fusion before. I think that's one of many technologies that I think could have a leapfrog effect, wherein the countries that are actually deploying and have the capacity to deploy nuclear fusion power plants will be able to leapfrog, and could spell huge swaths of Africa, South America, many other places, Southeast Asia, that have real electricity needs, and could be a huge boon as well for the U.S. government, U.S. economy, I should say. So this is just one technology, but there's a number of others that I think have promise as well, in terms of storage solutions and the like. Good question, though.
Yeah, and on that, so do you think that would still be the best option considering like our climate and moving forward?
Yeah, big time. These are zero carbon. I'm generally only a fan of zero carbon solutions, to the extent possible and practicable. So yeah, these are zero carbon solutions for sure.
Okay, last question. I know you've been waiting for quite a few minutes.
Yes. So earlier on, you had mentioned how, in particular, like competition on a national scale is very important in the U.S. to try to be, number one in terms of renewable and green energy production and green technologies. But expanding upon that, I wanted to ask if you think there is room for like collaboration, particularly with the EU, since some may see the European Union as being a more proactive regulatory force compared to the US Congress. So do you think there's room for collaboration between the United States and the European Union when it comes to these green technologies? Whereas instead of the US trying to solo everything to be on top, we may be able to share in some positions.
100%. You've obviously done your homework. You mentioned the EU. Brussels sort of sees itself as leading in regulations. There's no doubt about that. For anyone that has experienced Europe and European regulation and the Byzantine regulatory apparatus there, it is quite difficult to get through. They also have some very smart climate policies and climate regulations that are quite good, that should be emulated by others. So it's a bit of a two-step dance there, where, man, they're good at regulation, but goodness gracious, they're good at regulation. So on the flip side, I think there's a huge opportunity for friendshoring, generally speaking, not just Europe, but Europe's a big player in this, because they have an industrial base, particularly Germany, but it's not just Germany, Italy, France, big energy players, big automotive sectors, big industrial sectors, large steel producers, aluminum producers, and they're getting swamped. There's a huge set of dumping that's happening by the Chinese and others, and that's creating havoc in Europe and a lot of anxiety in Europe. And so there will be a need. It's not whether or not the US needs to be number one. You meant that I probably, if I said that, I shouldn't have said it. That's not the point. The point is to create real independence with real allies. It's not necessarily the case that US has to be number one in everything. We don't have to mine everything or process everything or refine everything or create everything or manufacture everything. That's not the case. We should still have a very interdependent economy with our friends and allies, but we should not be critically dependent on countries with autocracies or countries that have significant disagreements with the United States. That should not be the case. So that's the argument that I'm making, which is that we need to develop that industrial policy to maintain that critical independence, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everything has to be done in the United States and only the United States. That's not feasible either. Hope that helps. But it's a very good question, and you obviously have done your homework on it.
Well, thank you all very much for coming out this evening. Our next event will be coming up on September 14th at 5 p.m. over in the Robinson Theater on the other side of campus, where our topic will be TikTok on Trial, the politics of social media regulation. And our featured speaker will be Florida Secretary of State and UNF alum Cord Bird. Finally, I want to say a huge thank you again to Rohan for coming to UNF today and for giving up his time to talk about this really important topic. Thank you, Rohan.
No problem. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it, man.